afternoon. Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to introduce you before you, Mark. Some of my unfortunately not known people. Very briefly, where he's been, as it were, started his career on aircraft research, maths diploma, mathematician.
Maths physicist.
I'm a last mathematician. And he moved into cybernetics in the 1960s. I never found out what happened. We might find out today. He's a founder member of the Computer Arts Society, a PCS specialist. And he's had a part-time research fellowship at the Royal College of Art. But now, the company he founded, Systems Innovation, is 40 years old. And as he said, I'm going to quote this, the main providers of software infrastructure for major cultural heritage institutions, such as museums, galleries, and image libraries. And that sounds like pretty complex, straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. First of all, I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk. I gather the invitation came from the conversation between Roger and Doron Swade, whom I thank. And I hope you will relate with things as well. My title is, I hope not too inscrutable. The object really of today is to try to see the development of computing in a very, very broad context, i.e. almost sort of the evolution of life on this planet and what information has done to that, what's happening in that process, because now, today, we seem to be at a point of a rather critical situation where doom seems to lie ahead on many different fronts. Is that the case, and what are the signals we should be looking at, and what should we, and by that I mean people in our profession, the information technology, computer development, actually be doing about this? So the aim is to stand way back right now and think about the development of human animal. That means going back about 8 million years, really. If you look at this, you can see up on the left-hand side here, 8 million years. Homo sapiens up there, tiny little bit, a few 100,000 years. And this broad sweep of time with hominid evolution here, chimpanzees up there, and common ancestors down here somewhere. That huge biological process, which I think our biologists are beginning to understand in evolution, how it takes place, is still something of a mystery, but much, much better understood than it was. The main point I want to make here is that the bit that I'll be talking about is this whole few 100,000 years up there. But behind that is a very powerful engine that's been running for, in fact, years since life began on the planet. Just to emphasize that, this talks about brain size, this slide. You can see brain size down here. Homo sapiens up there, again, very small bit of the time span. Or Neanderthals had bigger brains than ours. They went extinct, so size isn't everything, as they say. But broadly what we're looking at here is a process that's taken place over a very, very long period of time. Until we get to about a quarter of a million years ago. We see that at that point there was some kind of physiological shift. Brain size seemed to go in spurts, and there was a spurt around 500,000 years ago, which then led to this business of much more sophisticated tool making and much more sophisticated communication. And as it says there, what seemed to happen, and we'll discuss this in a bit more detail in a minute, that separate capabilities that had evolved over that very long period of time seemed to come together in the human mind and allow for a kind of fluidity of of capability which hadn't existed in other animals. Now, my thesis, operating from that evolutionary perspective, is that when we look at our cultural perspective, today we seem to have different kinds of functionality. We have different specialisms. We have scientists, we have artists, we have wealth creation, and so on. We'll look at that in a bit more detail. So the question in my mind is, have we reached a point in our cultural evolution which is rather similar to the point where the brain or mind evolution had reached about 1 million years ago, where there was suddenly a coming together of capabilities which led to the explosion of human culture. So my question is IT the catalyst for that next step? And we'll look at that in a bit more detail. Okay, so when we look back into the animal world, and not just the human world, we can see that there are general intelligences, general capabilities. Basic learning and decision-making occurs in all animal and biological situations. Some animals make things, human animal predominantly the expert at that. Linguistic intelligence, well, yes, it's there in many other animals, but not to the same extent as in the human animal. Social intelligence, collaboration, mating, yes, exists clearly in other animals. And this is what I call natural history intelligence in the end, because it's knowing what to eat, what to hunt, and so on. So these are 4 or 5 at least, and probably others, of separate capabilities, separate intelligences, separate skills, which the animal needs in order to survive, both as an individual and as a species. And then something happened. Stephen Mython, an archaeologist of Reading, proposes that this trigger for the development was this coming about separate intelligences being able to work together. Something happened about 200,000 years ago, 250,000 years ago. We don't know quite what it was. Was it physiological? Was it a kind of software reorganization in the brain? We don't really know. But his thesis is these functionalities came to work together. He called this cognitive fluidity. And that is the bedrock on which subsequent human evolution has developed, our cultural evolution particularly. A physiological, biological frames will not have changed that much in that very short period of time. But the argument is, we'll explore this in a bit more detail, that as we shifted into this cognitive fluidity, we kind of unleashed a flood of innovative capability which has driven us, our species, since that time. So he postulated these 3 architectural phases: general intelligence, we've seen these before, multiple separate specialized intelligences, and then they begin to work together. Knowledge and ideas flow between them. A kind of classic illustration of this kind of process is that about archaeologists from perhaps 90,000 years ago cite the discovery of a funeral shawl, which was made out of very small shells. And it's the first such thing to be found where the capability for tool making, making arrowheads or whatever, which had existed in the species for many hundreds of thousands of years, came together with the social intelligence to try to make something which was symbolically important for the human animal. So the technical skill combined with the social status skills came together to make that particular object. And that's where we got to, perhaps 180,000 years ago. Things seem to get up and running. Our communication process are just about there. Art, well, I mentioned the bead shawl from 80,000 years ago. Yes, that's coming into existence. Social cooperation, and it gets going. And from 50,000 years ago, we see this dramatic increase through the evidence of cave paintings, ultimately the development of separate communities and so on. We'll look at that in a minute too. But from 50,000 years ago, the acceleration is dramatic, and really what I'm after now is some kind of understanding of what it was that was in place 50,000 years ago that allowed this very rapid cultural evolution and the combinations of capabilities that make that possible. But before that, and I think there's an important event, so before 1,000 years ago, there was a well-documented volcanic eruption, a huge, it was the biggest eruption for more than 2 million years, and it created really a 10,000 year winter of ash, and the layers of ash are evident. Now, that threw life on this planet into an extremely precarious situation, and there were many extinctions. It's estimated that perhaps there were a million, few 100,000, a million human Homo sapiens on the planet at about that time. After that time, it is thought there were only a few thousand. Estimates vary between 1,500 and 35,000 breeding pairs that were around after that winter, that 10,000 year period, and therefore, my argument is that our culture must emerge from that, from the strengths and weaknesses and the things that these people had, the survivors had, the skills and capabilities that they had, and what was weeded out by the extreme circumstances that they found themselves working in, living in. So, as I say, with extremely nasty British short life expectancy in hunter-gatherer communities that we know about was low anyway. 40 was an old man, an old woman. At that time, probably 23, 24 was an old person, and therefore the communication processes needed to transmit skills and so on were extremely important. So juveniles will learn fast and survive. So the good communicators probably have better chances of surviving. Technical skills, the ability to make things, mark making, I don't use the term here, showing and telling as a peculiarly human kind of activity was, I surmise, very valuable in that kind of period. So how do we make a spear? How do we find where food is? And the ability to communicate that to essentially small children, we regard as small children today, so that they could survive and breed in their teens. And perhaps we'll get back to that model thing now. And basically survive on the basis of a certain subset of capabilities. And what I've called that, the general term, is externalisation. What has become apparent that the ability to get knowledge out of one's head and therefore available to other people, whether it's your children or other people, was the distinguishing feature. That what evolution had set up as a platform which led to the possibility of externalisation, and this cataclysm 70,000 years ago set up a situation where that skill, that externalisation process, was the means of survival. So these skills are, I would argue, quite the basis on which we now work. It's communication, it's mark making, it's intention. And just to summarise where we are, you can see a kind of set of events. The earlier rituals I mentioned, the burial shore, 80,000 BC, and so on. So a process at work here which accelerated beyond the 60,000 then, but beyond that, the coming together and the growth of symbolic things, the ability to collaborate, the need to collaborate, so on, we're all there in place, the need for organisation, with things like this, compassion for the unfortunate. This is also true of Neanderthals, so other animals, other species had this capability. So, where are we now? I like to think of these things as propensities rather than simple facts. You know, we have, Homo sapiens has a propensity to make things. We just make things. Part of our inheritance. Externalisation, I talked about this using hands and tools. Externalising thoughts using words. You know, when did language actually kick in the word sense? There's a discussion now as to whether music or intonation came first before language, and language was built on intonation. It seems to me quite logical that one argument, for example, is that when the human animal lost hair and fur, the baby would have nothing to cling on to, and therefore the baby had to be put down, and therefore communication had to take place using sound, so the mother could identify the child. So the business of language emerging from sound and the statistical requirements, and I needed to analyse that and much better understood. But it does seem to me to be quite a strong hypothesis that music or intonation actually came first and would account for why today we have such a music is so powerful in our society. Externalised thoughts, yes. I mentioned again this business of communication and how to get youngsters to understand what's going on and to transmit what was previously in our heads. The fourth thing, though, the propensity to externalise emotion, again, I think is terribly important. And we'll see later that one of the key physiological elements at that time, and we've only really just discovered this in the past few years, that this business of understanding others, the last point there, is bound up with this set of things called mirror neurons. That is, when we carry out an action, certain bits of our brain fire to control our arm or our feet or our legs or whatever. Certain neuronal structures will fire away while that's carried out. Mirror neurons are those which fire in a similar way when we see other people doing these actions. So it's as if we could, as it were, inhabit or see another action, and our brains fire in the same way as if we were doing that action. So this idea of mirror neurons, I think, is very, very important when we come to think of a collaboration, understanding others, so-called theory of mind, that we begin to realize that other people are rather like ourselves, and therefore we have to develop relationships that take account of that. So, prehistory, very slow adaptive change. We began by looking at a huge time scale of 8 billion years, but still very, very small in geological terms, but nevertheless in life in our animal kingdom, a long evolutionary period from 8 million years ago. Then a period of rapid change, and then suddenly an explosion about 50,000 years ago. And there we are. We've arrived at this. We see the developments through cave paintings. We see the developments through the archaeological trace of human settlement. Hunter-gatherer communities, very small hunter-gatherer communities, probably 10, 12, possibly 20 individuals living and working together, developing the local skills needed for the particular environments. When these environments get depleted, then they can move, and over the period from about that time, 60,000 years ago, to 20,000 years ago, then human animals had almost visited every inhabitable part of the planet. Australia, 60,000 years ago, and all from out of Africa. So there was a process of these small groups just moving around and hunting and gathering where they could. So an extraordinary, I think an extraordinary capability for adapting and moving and using tools and making boats and so on that appeared about that time. we arrive at a point perhaps 20,000 years ago in Europe. Cave paintings predominate, the Neanderthals have gone extinct, and we're still trying to find out exactly how that happened. And then there's another ice age, and again, great pressure on human beings who found themselves in the areas of the planet which were covered with ice, which was really right down towards the Mediterranean. Then after that period, after that last ice age, in very recent times, 12,000 years ago, we begin to see that another process is taking place. The skills that have been developed in making and in making art and in communication begin to spread. We begin to get more settled communities. We know that the ability to domesticate animals and domesticate seeds and food and wheat and so on are from about 10, 11,000 years ago, and settled communities become possible when there are surpluses that can be used to support life in a settled area. With that, division of labour, all the kind of processes that we begin to get familiar with today, division of labour, management beliefs. Well, you saw earlier that ideas about religion and belief are deeply rooted in the ideas of symbolism, and undoubtedly in trying to understand cause and effect in a mysterious world. Then different beliefs coming with different leading to clashes, and underpinning much of that, or developing at the same time, is this notion of trading. You can exchange things that we have with that group over there, and implicit in that is the concept of the deal. What is valuable to me? What is valuable to you? And I use the kind of mirror neurons, the understanding, the theory of mind, if you like, to try to understand how I can get a good deal in a trading situation. So from these various skills that have evolved over many tens of thousands of years, we begin to get to a point where the facility for settled communication, for division of labour, for the refinement of skill, which is the important thing here, the refinement of skill, and the linking processes, the legal processes, the collaborative techniques that allow people to both live together and organize themselves to defend, of course. So, on to modern times. We arrive, out of we did jump from village communities to feudalism. We want to go into the kind of classic period of history. We arrive at modern times when, perhaps 500 years ago, we can see a kind of fruiting of many of these processes that I've mentioned. See it fruiting in terms of the techniques of painting, techniques of art, the use of that for guiding reliefs. We see the technologies for printing. We see innovation processes taking place with increasing frequency. And once the in a sense that genie, the technological genie, begins to struggle out the bottle during the Renaissance, then it is out, and innovation processes begin to proceed at a very fast rate. So European Enlightenment, a particularly important phenomenon worldwide of why the European Renaissance was so important, is the subject of much discussion today, and various theories around. I'll give you a bit of a reading list at the end. It was a particularly interesting book from my point of view, which has just been published last year, called Why the West Rules, for Now. And it is an attempt to understand what the processes at work were, which meant that Europe was the centre of this kind of process and not China, for example, and try to understand what that was. So much of this thinking is coming together around the big questions that have to be asked about where we're currently at. So I mentioned at the beginning this notion of intelligent functionalities and the relationship possibly to cultural functionalities that we have in our world, and I'm sure if we all sat down and thought about it, we come up with slightly different categorizations, but nevertheless these seem to me to be a reasonable half dozen or so of the areas of capability which are kind of separate. We know and have for many years the distinction between science and arts. We think we know more about the relationship between science and technology than we did. We'll talk about that in a wee bit. Our governance processes, mentioned these earlier in relation to village communities, how we set out rules and that people have to observe. Well, are our governance processes today actually capable of dealing with these other functionalities? I think it's certainly possible to argue that they're not, that we're getting to a situation where the products of science and the arts and so on are not well fed into decision-making institutions. And I think a classic example of that is the current turmoil over climate warming, and how you can get scientific input into decision processes, and how difficult, how extraordinarily difficult that's turning out to be. So I'm just making a point here that there are these separate capabilities, and mooting possibility that if they were to be able to collaborate more easily, then we might get into a situation where there are things that we can do better. So this cognitive fluidity happened then. As I say, there's probably probably some change, some perceptual change. It probably, almost certainly not physiological. It might have been physiological, but we're not at all sure. But somehow or other, the organisation of the brain changed, and it allowed this flow of knowledge and the interconnection between different specialisms to take place. There is a failure of communication. I've already mentioned that. My feeling now is that we do need a culture, a software update. We need a cultural process that says, yes, how can we make these processes work better? That flows amongst these functionalities, and this is a hypothesis. That what we're seeing in our world now is the emergence of a set of tools and techniques, innovations, which are pointing in the direction of better communication between different capabilities. I'll say no more than it's simply an indication that this could be the case, and there is accumulating evidence. I mean, you see this almost daily in the press now. Tweeting and images being sent around by telephone are really having a profound effect on the way that authorities are treating their responsibilities. Now, clearly there's a kind of idealism about the internet, which might say, yes, the information is free, and then automatically we'll all get together and make sensible decisions, and the governments will pay attention to us and all that sort of stuff. Well, there will be a process that happens, but will it happen in the way that we want? So, again, just repeating, scientific knowledge, I'm arguing, is externalized knowledge. It's a kind of apotheosis of that externalization process, which was selected for in that distant period when humanity was under intense pressure. That externalization process has continued with enormous acceleration over the past century, but it is a process that started a long, long time ago, and it is getting outside our heads what was previously locked up inside them. Allied to that, the scientific method has proven to be highly, and some might say, the most effective collaborative human effort ever in our evolutionary history, because of the results that it's produced in the past 400 or 500 years. So let's just think of a little bit about the scientific processes and technological processes that are at work. It's also true of mathematics. I really haven't mentioned much about mathematics. We're lapsed mathematician here, well, the mathematics department. But rather like technology, it is often the case that discoveries in mathematics anticipate their application. I think a classic illustration of that is playing around with imaginary numbers in the 19th century, well before their application in electrical engineering actually happened. There was the mathematical tool to hand when this technological innovation came along. And similar kind of processes at work in technology itself. The evolution of computing into an internet. It kind of had to come into existence. Was it an invention or was it a discovery? It's kind of half of my mind is we're involved in this process, this propensity for externalisation, and the innovations that we make in technologies are simply fed into that propensity, and the dynamic and drive forward comes from that. So I don't have an answer to that, but perhaps we can discuss that later. You know, do we actually make things up, or do we just discover things? And that's a fundamental question in maths and possibly also in our technology. That we tend to think about ourselves as capable of almost infinite innovation, but are we part of a process where the kind of lead time and how we react to, perhaps unconsciously, to demands from the environment to make things, and then that's picked up and we drive forward. So to try to tackle that issue, here are some thoughts. I mean, if you think about the beginning of life, and I did mention at the beginning of this talk that we go back huge amounts of time. The very earliest forms of life are clearly to do with energy processing. The first molecules that create sugars, for example, and then cells and all that sort of stuff. That was the beginning, the use of energy from the sun, basically, and possibly from volcanic things in the earth. And processing these in particular ways led to the beginning of life. Very soon after that, material processing, i.e. Taking things into a cell and processing it. And then information processing, well, yes, I mean, DNA is much about information. So at the very basic level of life, we have these three levels of let's call them system. Now, if we think about the human situation, of course, these are perfectly obvious. We are energy consumers. We do make things, we process material. Our recent civilization has been really about the evolution of ways of using energy to make things and then manage the making of these things. And so that this simple set of networks of energy processing, material processing, and information processing are inexorably intertwined in our culture as they are in our biological roots. Bottom point there, these are highly interconnected. If you snip one, you probably snip the lot. You know, they are highly interdependent. The way in which they balance each other out is one of the, in my mind, one of the goals that cybernetics had set itself in the 1960s. And that's really what cybernetics is about, is trying to understand this kind of complex system. So, in the early 21st century, it was the extraordinary challenging growth rates with these three things here. The human population, we're going to see 9 billion people on the planet within the next 30, 40 years, from 1 billion 200 years ago, 100 years ago. An incredible growth process, and the hockey stick curve is just rocketing away. And that obviously rings alarm bells associated with that huge growth in energy consumption. And running alongside that energy consumption and the human population growth and all the stuff that goes in between that, the economics, the trading, is technological innovation. We're seeing almost allied to population growth dynamic and energy consumption dynamic, the innovation dynamic. It's increasing at an enormous rate. So these three interconnected systems, again, are at some point in an incredibly delicate balance of a kind. We certainly don't understand enough about these balances yet to be able to engineer solutions. I want to come on to that. So the combination of these, to say there, is survival issues and possible extinction conditions. We have to accept that life on the planet is very precarious, always has been, and has wobbled many times in the past few billion years. However, what I want to concentrate on just for a wee bit is that the impact of these growth processes, population, energy consumption, and innovation, are stressing our governance processes. In the West, we've had what we call democracy. Now other communities, other nation-state concepts emerging, which are not so much based on our concept of democratic processes. So there's a debate. I mentioned the kind of tide of affairs. We're at such a point now where the evolution of democracy in our world is under challenge and being threatened by perhaps our technologies and other things, but also the sense of unease and sense of danger, really, that comes about from the effects of our population and our energy consumption. We can see, as I said, almost every day now, releases in the press about government concerns about the use of the internet, about the use of Facebook, about the use of mobile phones, and so on. There is a term, not my term, but the term democratic recession, to indicate a kind of rethinking. And when we look at, for example, the way that America has reacted to the WikiLeaks thing, with another extreme reaction, get rid of that man, get him in prison, etc. We see the way in which China has tried to control access to the internet and Google's reaction to that. As part of the American government's reactions to WikiLeaks was this business of getting Visa and various other paying mechanisms not to support the WikiLeaks facilities. So the central government was in fact acting on these companies and processes which have evolved in order to get them to toe a particular line. And that, I think, is what we mean by the democratic deficit there. That's not to include, such things as what's happening in Tunisia this past week, where, again, there was an attempt to stop people using the media and to lock up people who are blogging about the problems. And there was a situation, I think, last week when Twitter was going to be taken down for some maintenance process, and the government, American government, apparently asked Twitter not to do that, keep it going because of the stuff coming out of Tunisia, which might be affected by, might be helped along by Twitter being in existence. So I think that's, we're getting these, I think now, very clear indications that the relationship between information technology that evolved and the government processes are not fully worked out. There's a debate going on, many books coming out about these things. In fact, there's a book just out, I think, it's called after Dawkins is God Delusion. This book is called The Net Delusion, and it's essentially about trying to argue that the net is not the solution to our democratic problems. So, interesting times, as I say. At the same time, so I talked about really about the kind of pressures the government put on things, and I think the other things where governments try to free up data and make it available. When you see what's happening, for example, with some geographical data, the UK government particularly has been trying to open up its data to allow people to make applications, whether it's for tracking train times or buses or whatever, to make applications which will, as it were, lubricate the wheels of our existence. So I think we are in this trial and error process where there are things going on, and if you look at them individually, they look just like little events happening here and there. But what I'm trying to get at is that there is a trend, a kind of tide which is flowing, which is to do with the relationship between the externalisation, the cognitive processes that led to externalisation, and their intertwining with our technological and scientific capabilities. And I'm trying to understand where we are now in relation to these processes, these deeper processes, is really terribly important. And we need to try, I think, as scientists and engineers, to try to understand why it's so difficult for science and engineering to communicate with our ruling classes, if I can put it that way. Probably can nowadays, government. So, as I say, testing the envelope of collaboration and participation. Let's try and understand that, using externalised information and knowledge to find solutions. Okay, we talked about the levels of intertwined system underlying biology and also underlying human cultural development of energy and information and material processing. I think we can now begin to point to the evolution of a fourth concept. I've used the term, not very comfortable with the term design systems, because in today's world, the term design doesn't mean quite what I would want it to mean. So my point is that as we have this externalised processes and we see the intertwingling of the energy, material, information, we can see on top of this, and this is the debate, discussion, the processes going on at the moment, that we need to try and find solutions to these problems. Our systems have got to the point where they can flag up dangerous issues like climate warming, like food problems. We don't have systemic ways of reacting to these. We have to feed them into a government process, and of course the climate discussions, again, I will use as a model that the Kyoto Agreement was set up 10, 12 years ago. The Copenhagen thing failed completely last year. Cancun has last year, rather 2010, didn't do very much. So we just do not have the capability for feeding the stuff that's coming out of our knowledge, our external knowledge systems and our science and technology, for feeding it into the government processes which can act on these and actually take decisions which we'd be comfortable with. I don't know how we get to that, but I'm trying to call the term design system to try to, as it were, capture the notion that what we need to be doing is looking at problems, bringing effort to bear to analyse the problems, where analysis requires research to do that research, but also to try and find the means of plugging that stuff, that knowledge, that capability into our governance processes. And that seems to be proving extraordinarily difficult. Whether that's to do with a kind of natural process in government itself, ever since human beings had authority structures, there have been people in these authority structures who tried to, as it were, what journalists used to call speak truth unto power, i.e. tell our masters, our ruling classes, what the truth actually is, so they don't get isolated from the real world as can happen very, very easily. So this idea of the design system is trying to bring together various aspects of our technological capability, but also our communication capability, and also our understanding capability to try to make decision structures which can act effectively on our behalf. And I'm not sure how this will work out. Do we have the engineering skills? Do we have the engineering knowledge to be able to make a design system? Is it something which is going to evolve naturally? Perhaps it is. My argument would be, yes, it is. It's evolving naturally. It's going to be a close run thing. But it is an evolution process at work where that debate about whether it's Twitter or WikiLeaks or Facebooks or blogs, all these things are a chatter at the moment, which will eventually settle into some kind of pattern, some kind of process, perhaps even some kind of institutional process, which is recognized by our governments, use that in plural, as ways of doing things. When you think about the rate at which technological innovation is going ahead, well, in our lifetimes in computing, we don't really be told this. It's enormously powerful. I haven't mentioned the you think about the evolution of technology. It is different from biological evolution because of this idea that once you've got an engineering capability and a technical solutions, they very seldom go away. They tend to live around a long time. And what happens in engineering or technological evolution is that you get this combinatorial effect. You've got a bit that does this, and a bit over here that does something else, and a bit over there, and you can bring them together. And you get more complex structures building that way. Whereas in biological evolution, it doesn't work like that. You get little changes which survive or don't. In our world, in our cultural world, and in the technological innovation world, then you've got this so-called combinatorial evolution capability, which means it can accelerate at a very fast pace, and that's indeed what we've seen happening. So, adaptation and goal settings. I think really what I'm saying is that we've arrived now at this fluid situation where our externalisation processes have resulted in produced certain results. Huge population, huge energy consumption. And we understand, I think, or a growing understanding of the cultural, let's call it that, trajectory I mentioned there, of pooling knowledge. So we have that. We do not have the capability yet for making effective use of that in being able to engineer effective solutions. But my goodness me, do we need them? So I've outlined the path of cultural evolution. It's got to this stage of this current debate, this current process. It's very, very fluid, it's very live, it's very intense, and I think it's very exciting. Crucially dependent on ICT. I won't go now into the details, but we're seeing the emergence of AI techniques and ways in which the world relates to that externalized knowledge. It was mentioned that much of my company's work over the past decade or so has been concerned with collections, museum collections, art gallery collections, and ways of describing these collections. And we end up with very large databases, for example. DDA across the road probably has many, many millions, and our collections information system in that is a very large database system able to handle very complex data structures associated with descriptions of physical objects, be they tapestries or be they pottery in the British Museum or whatever. So you end up with this huge database of things that have been described by curators. That's the external knowledge process, so inside the computer. You've got that externalised process that curators have brought to bear on understanding the objects. Now, it's very clear, I think, that when you sit someone down in front of this vast database of objects, they can't just wander about. It's not, you end up like Google, you get millions of hits if you're wanting to do something on very unspecific in a search in the British Museum or the V&A. So we need more sophisticated structures. The way things are going is towards a better understanding of narrative and what narratives individual users can bring to bear and what narratives can be brought out of the databases. Can the objects be linked together to form a narrative which is understandable to the user? So that kind of process of understanding the user and the narrative requirements is what's beginning to happen now in our world of museum collection management. And we work on several research projects which are leading towards this notion of highly intelligent support from the database systems themselves in encouraging people to understand more about what's in them. So, as I say at the bottom there, and this is where we have to exercise our engineering capabilities, the dynamics of these very large-scale systems, which involve cognitive entities, i.e. human beings, whether it's an economy or whatever. We just don't know. We know quite a lot about the stabilities and properties of sophisticated engineering systems, be it nuclear reactors, traffic control, traffic systems, logistics, and so on. But the dynamics of cognitive systems are something we've not really got to grips with. And these can be extraordinarily unstable, as we saw from the banking crisis a couple of years ago. And that is trying to piece itself together, but it's being pieced together in the same way as it was before, so it's going to fall over again. And the understanding, kind of scientific or technical understanding of large, complex cognitive systems is an area that needs to be studied much more intensively than it is. So, to end, the narrative of human development is a point of high drama. I think the doomsters are out there in legions. We have to hang on to an optimistic propensity, if you like, for thinking about solutions, for using innovation, using inventive skills, to try to get to a point where we can engineer our way out of it. We don't know. All I can say is at this stage, I hope we, by that I mean the human race, will be able to see the next episode. And I hope it will. So I'll end there with some, if you're interested in following this up, these are a selection of books that I found particularly influential and interesting in relation to the large-scale systemic evolutionary processes that we've talked about. And more recent ones, which again begin to recognize the issues and discuss the kind of issues that I've been talking about that are long-term effects. We have to try and understand these. Maynard Smith and Safnary is a particularly interesting one from the point of view of understanding the very beginnings of biological life. Kevin Kelly's book, The Top, What Technology You Want, I found particularly interesting. He's taken the view that the innovation processes that are at work and the population growth are just at this point of crisis, and things need to be done. Net evolution already mentioned. The Master and the Emissary, fascinating book. It's really about tackling this issue of how the left brain and right brain have evolved together. His thesis is that the right brain is the master and the left brain is the emissary. It does what it's told, but there's a big debate around that. But it's very important to try to understand this evolutionary process and what I call the externalisation, and this is linked to the brain processes that we talked about earlier. Why the West rules, I've already mentioned from our patterns of history. That sets out a very interesting kind of social analysis as to why our Renaissance here in the West has been the dominant one for the past 300 or 400 years, but probably will not be for the next 300 or 400 years. And at the bottom there are many foresight programs. The government had one. I've not heard much about it recently since the last election. There was a government foresight program. This is one, the output, futureagenda.org, which was a study funded by Vodafone and involved quite a large number of experts around the world just getting together in workshops and trying to discuss what the key issues were, understanding these. And it's really quite well presented, I thought, rather well presented, and tackles a number of the detailed issues that we now face. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you for a fascinating talk. There seem to be a number of issues which you perhaps hinted at, but didn't put into your text. We live, as you say, in a complex world. There are more, perhaps we live in parallel universes. There's a parallel universe of entrepreneurs and innovators and engineers who use the same technology, not for benign purposes, as you suggested we should be aiming at, but for subverting our civilization. They range from the real dark side to the grey areas of pornography, where some significant advances in technological, in the way the net is used, have come from that particular source. So, our civilization is suffused with this dark side as well as the light side. And that we should put more emphasis and more study on this dark side.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other point is I want to make is perhaps there is a kind of knowledge paradox. We live in this world in which we have externalized all this information and knowledge. Yet this is a world in which unknowledge rules, counter-knowledge rules.
Yeah.
We have opinions and beliefs masquerading as knowledge.
Exactly.
And who's winning?
Well, so the jury is out, or the debate is on, or the game is on. Certainly, the dark side, yes. The human animal is the human animal. It's a very dangerous beast, as we know. I perhaps concentrated, and you're quite right, there are many aspects in this talk which need to be further development, and there's a very, very sketchy outline. But yes, I have concentrated on perhaps the positive aspects of collaboration, through kind of neurophysiological processes that called mirror neurons and so on. But these could well work, and in reverse, and we know that the human propensity for the dark side, for war, for killing, is just there.
And the mafia collaborate as well.
Exactly so. And by the democratic recession, I sometimes think, what government in the world is not close to organized crime? What government in the world is not close to it? So yes, the game's on, very definitely. And the second part of your question, I'm very, very aware of. I mean, I think what I used to call the battle between belief systems and knowledge systems. The knowledge systems come along, but belief systems have been there a long time, and we're beginning to get evidence that our brains, in fact, construe the world in terms of our beliefs, not in terms of our knowledge. And we've got to tackle that, and the way in which our information systems can be geared to do that, I think is terribly important. So I mentioned right at the end there this issue of trying to create information systems which have an intelligent appreciation, not just of the stuff behind stored in the British Museum's database, but also extracting from the user some idea of their narrative, what their understandings, if you like, and bridging the two. And if we get to systems like that, then perhaps knowledge systems will begin to dominate. But at the moment, I would say the belief systems are there, and it's dislodging those.
And using the same technology to spread their
Exactly.
version of knowledge.
We have to subvert that.
But they would argue that faith in the scientific method is itself a belief system.
Yeah, I know. Well, except there's some evidence there. There's some evidence that it works.
I'll make 2 points. First is, one thing that I think runs a bit counter to your thesis is that 500 years ago it was possible for people to become an expert in almost anything, and the classic case was really large. But nowadays it is increasingly difficult to become a real expert even across the whole of one discipline. And that, so integrating these things is becoming in many ways more difficult because of the specialisation and increase. The other point is just in a sense partly following up the point on dream. Of course, the reason why people don't want to listen to climate change is that it's extremely unpopular. And so people, what have to be done about it? The consequence is that people like to believe it's not true.
Yeah, indeed. And therefore things don't happen. And again, it comes back to this issue of our governance systems being at a different stage, if you like, of development or understanding than our knowledge systems. But yes, the very delicate relationships between belief systems and knowledge systems has got to be worked out. It's being worked out, and the technology, I think, is driving it.
Can I just follow up what you said there about climate change? I see the climate change problem being problem on the one hand of the individual. Individual said, I'm worried about future life. I want to live here, whatever. And so
So you could speak up.
And the other entity involved in this argument is the corporates, big vested interests, the oil companies, whatever companies, who have a belief and a point, driven not from what's sensible in your mind, but something which is in the mind of a corporate company. And that seems to me, they're both problems, aren't they? They're different.
And you've also got the problem with the individual who says, I must drive my car.
Yeah, well, indeed. Indeed. There's a big difference between you have people working in big corporations who have one thought as individual and another thought as part of company policy. And what worries me in these situations is company policy, it's like religion. Religion's a problem too, because they're organised to take a particular point of view and therefore get strength from numbers. And
Isn't there a point here, again it's bound up with the human-animal psyche, there's a great wish, is it, to abrogate responsibility, to say, I can't do much about this. So you join a religion, it makes the decisions for you. You join a corporate structure, you make your own little decisions, but by and large the big decisions are made for you. And therefore I tend to see these structures as means of depriving or removing the need for people to take responsibility for themselves in some way. So it's very, very complex.
But in a sense, we generate the epoch of the expert. We don't take responsibility, we go to the expert.
Yeah, well, isn't it strange, the knowledge paradox, this idea that we get increasingly specialised and no one can encompass more than a very tiny amount of knowledge. Well, at the same time, while that's happened, or perhaps because that's happened, the proliferation of information technology means that we're spending, small amounts of time, tiny amounts of time thinking about things and then moving on to the next thing. So our span of attention has got less and less as our information technology has got more sophisticated. That is bound up, I think, with what you call the knowledge paradox, that somehow or other the systems that are in train, this movie has certain characteristics which may not be in our interests. It may be accentuating the dark side, because if you divide and rule, you know, the old statement, and that continues apace, then the ways in which we can be ruled by whatever stripe of ruler becomes easier. So the important thing is that these troublemaking anarchists who want to challenge everything they have to challenge everything and try and make it happen, and that will stimulate the system. So I tend to think this kind of natural process that's going on is bound up with these stimuli and the existing structures like belief systems, corporate structures, armies, religions, whatever.
I'd like to ask a question of the mathematician of you. You mentioned the banking crisis. Do you think if you've been privy to all of the trading rules that were built into computer systems, and you wrote them all down and analysed them as a set of differential equations or whatever, that you could have actually warned that the banking crisis was going to happen long before it did? And do you think you could sort of reverse engineer that to decide what rule we ought to put on the banking system as an example of bringing mathematics and business together?
Yeah, I think there's two levels of mathematics at work here. I mean, one is the so-called the rocket scientists who were recruited from universities to go into banks and work out all these fiendish products, and clearly that's had a grotesque effect, a kind of destabilizing effect on our whole world. But the other bit of mathematics is perhaps more bound up with in the Norbervina sense of cybernetics and trying to understand command and control. That understanding is not there yet.
That's what I'm getting at. Had that cybernetic approach been there all along, maybe you could have said ages ago, this is not a stable system.
Maybe. And again, it's part of the process of the so-called academic world. The structures there clearly are in terms of subject divisions. So there's history of science, physics, chemistry, and so on. Excuse me. So the academic structures that cybernetics, the cyberneticians of the 1950s and 1960s were trying to get above didn't work. The funding processes just didn't work for them. And the pressure after the Second World War, of course, excuse me, went away, and then the existing academic structures then took over, and we then have this high division of specialism, whereas we need to try and reverse that, I believe, and go back to these other general systems ideas, and particularly to try and get a grip of what I've called the cognitive system. You know, what is the difference between a physical system, which uses energy and stabilizes itself through perhaps biological evolution and so on, as opposed to a cognitive system where you've got free agents running about in there, probably being able to outguess what's going to happen. And where do the instabilities come? Are there general rules for cognitive systems as there are for physical dynamic systems? And we haven't found this. Sorry.
Would any form of mathematics have helped us in the banking crisis, given that part of the problem was basic human dishonesty? Dodgy data.
And the political system was just not prepared to do anything about it. I don't know if people saw the Pesky program on television. To me, I hate Bob Pesky, very straight. I don't like him as a journalist. But he's a marvellous program to me, because it showed just how stupid the system was, or how dangerous the system was. It's going to happen again. He's very persuasive about it. And apparently, no one's prepared to do anything about it. Bankers certainly aren't. And we can come to the politicians, as far as I can see, why? That points to me about where the politicians fit into this process. I've got a feeling that
they're working on belief systems, because the other things are too difficult for them to understand.
Sure, it's the politicians who should be trying to find the solutions to the problem. They're government. But if you think about government, they don't. They're concerned about their next vote. It's very worrying. Sorry, I've got lots of hands now. I stimulated something. That's what the gentleman with the cough.
Yes, surely the biggest problem to this, if you like, the logical approach, is short-term preservation of power. The people who can actually do anything about it are only interested in next week's vote, or maybe next year's at the most. there's no incentive to go for a long-term solution. However much knowledge there is floating around, if it's a question of, am I going to be popular next time my turn the vote comes up, or am I going to be unpopular, becomes a far more important point to people than how much knowledge I have.
I think you're supporting a case that there is, in fact, a democratic recession. There's something not working, and we need to try and find out what it is. Well, you begin to think, how is the Chinese economic growth engine working? Well, because they make it happen, like the Victorians, make things happen.
And you've got the difference between the real truth and the press.
Who will speak the truth on the past?
Recent talks and David's reference to the press here puts me in mind of a book that I read about 3/4 of and lost, which is Albert Camus and his writings in the journal Combat, which started during the occupation. And time again, he's saying it's vital that the press should not be controlled by money, and whereas what's actually happened is the exact opposite of that. And I think that's often the essence of it, the channels of opinion forming are monopolised by the very rich.
Yeah, I often think that journalists, rather like the medical profession, they should take something like a Hippocratic oath and have very strict standards, because we're not being set up. We're not being set up by the state. No one's speaking truth under power, if I can use that expression again, and yet we have to start doing it. Perhaps Assange and WikiLeaks is getting near saying what our belief's truth is, or some such process going on there.
I never thought I'd find myself saying this, but on the political side, what we really need was something approaching the Guardians of Plato's Republic.
Well, I think the issues about knowledge and so on are clearly bound up with that. Are you the wise men who would be princes of Plato's Republic? It's good. You've got all this experience and knowledge and so on.
You talked about Twitter earlier. Twitter, I think people just generated an electronic high-speed internet.
Do you have you ever tweeted?
No.
Hands up here who's ever tweeted. One lady.
I see things happening with somebody with a clever idea in their head.
Yeah.
Not necessarily malicious, but misinformation.
Yeah.
Or decides that let's go back and overturn prosecution. Sure, it was like, well, let's go back and undo that. And this is more. And then you hear governments, the current government, talking about will be guided what the Twitterverse tells us.
Yeah.
It's electronic more brutal. It is. It's electronic more.
Anyway, it's happening. It's happening. Yeah.
Sorry, someone wants to tweet back here.
The powers that we are reading it,
Oh, yeah.
and 50,000 people decide
No,
to
sorry,
go flat.
Here we go, lady.
The lady wants to
Twitter.
Yes. I do use Twitter quite frequently, and you can choose who's following you and who you want to follow. So it's like reading a particular newspaper. You choose by the Times, you choose by the Sun and the Independent. You are in control who you want to listen to. So it's only the mob's actually divided up into lots of different sectors, just like newspapers are.
Yeah.
So you get the safety in the fact that mini mobs.
Well, I don't see why they're any more or less problematic than choosing to listen to a particular newspaper. The only point is that the letters page in the newspaper is now, if you like, if you look at the metaphor, you're using Twitter like that. You have control of what you say. You don't have to wait for the editor to allow you to. So that letters page is free to use, to get at.
I think there is a problem that with, and it's with computers in general, the internet and everything, people believe what they read. If it's on the computer, it must be right.
The same applies to newspaper.
Big danger.
It applies to the
What's
sun.
the name?
It depends what language you use. If you use the same language as your reader, then they might believe you. If you use a language that they're not okay with, they don't feel familiar with, they may not. And we live in a diverse, in an environment with many diverse communities, with different types of language. I mean, the difference between the Sun and the Times, for example, same kind of different groups. It's a different media.
Frankly, we're trying to get
I want to just give a piece of information. Several people have raised the issue of the credit crunch and IT. The LSE has got a research project looking into two questions. To what extent did the IT actually enable the credit crunch to happen? With the way it organized the systems or didn't organize the systems. And secondly, what could IT have done to prevent it happening? And we're having a 2-day workshop in March on that topic. And so if anybody is interested, please get in touch with me. f.land@lse.ac.uk.
Right.
I first came across George as a spotty teenager in 1966. I had a place on our computer science course, but very little idea of what that entailed. I was taken under George's wing for a week of what we would now call the experience. He took me to Brighton Technical College, as it then was, and I was shown an ICT 1301. I was allowed to push buttons. I was allowed to punch cards, which I did very badly, if I recall. What came across to me, and what I took away from it, was George's incredible enthusiasm for his subject. Here we are 45 years later, I'm still here, he's still here. His enthusiasm is undiminished. He's taken us today places where he hasn't been before, where I haven't been before. Places which will give us, I think, a lot of food for thought. We've already spent half an hour putting the world to rights. What more can you ask for at all? George, thank you for coming today. It's been great. It's been really good. Thank you very much.
Before you go, just the usual announcements. Two announcements. First of all, the next meeting of the CCS is in February, on the 17th of February. It's the evolution of hard disk drives. And Neil Paul. So good to see you there. The other announcement is we're talking about you are still here and he's still here. Of course, who isn't now here is Morris Lewis, who's died since the last meeting. We've had some, I think, fantastic good obituaries, which we've all read at least one everywhere, and I think there's a great tribute. As part of that tribute, there is to be a meeting in Cambridge on the 27th of June, a sort of moral seminar. We should announce it. It will be open to anyone who wants to come. We'll start with lunch in his college, and then the people of Barton have a series of presentations, which we hope will be a series of personal reminiscences and tributes to Morris and to another side. So please put that in the diary if you're interested in coming. We'd like to see you there. Thank you very much. 27th of June. It's a month. Thank you for coming. See you next time.